Okay, well look, we're here today, I suppose, united in opposition to the ratification of the free trade agreement, which is known as CETA, which is between the EU and Canada. I think it's important to note that all of the trading aspects of this deal are actually happening. The only part that's yet to be ratified is the investor court system, and Ireland is one of 10 countries that hasn't ratified CETA, and all of those countries share the same concerns that we here today do, which is we're locking ourselves into investor courts that undermines the sovereignty of our own courts, but also has a chilling effect on public policy. So I let the others speak in terms of the process within Leinster House, but we're very concerned that the pre-legislative scrutiny was waived, because we think that the public deserve to know the implications of locking ourselves into these investor courts. So the event today is, I suppose, to sort of replicate what a pre-legislative scrutiny would be. We're hearing from academics, law academics from both European and Canadian, about the effects of these investor courts, and members of the various political parties and independents will have an opportunity to ask those academics the questions that they should have been able to ask at an Oireachtas committee.
Yeah. So I think it was deeply disappointing that the Foreign Affairs Committee chose to waive scrutiny and pre-legislative scrutiny of what I think is probably one of the most consequential bills that might be going through in the next number of years. This is a piece of legislation that is designed to facilitate signing Ireland up effectively to investment courts, which will and we've seen right around the world, will have an effect and have had a huge effect on the freedom to deliver proper public policy. And we're saying that at a time when we're facing the climate crisis. We know that cases have consistently been taken against climate action. We know that there's huge exposure in terms of other areas where regulation is badly needed. And what we are is creating a massive hostage to fortune, entirely unnecessarily, because what's very clear, and it's clear from the Supreme Court, is there isn't an obligation on Ireland to ratify. 99.9% of the trade is already all happening under provisional application, and it has been for a number of years. So what this really is about tying us unnecessarily into an investor court system, which will allow corporations to sue if they feel they have been unfairly treated. And again, to be clear, that sounds like, well, we wouldn't treat them unfairly, but that is the basis on which cases have been taken right across the world. Even some Canadian companies we know who are operating in Ireland have in the past taken cases which, for example, led to France diluting its climate laws. So there's a really significant impact, and ties the hands of future governments to make laws that represent the will of the people, the public desire for stepping up on the challenges, and it is a direct erosion of public policy, freedom and space. And it really, really is a dangerous piece of legislation, and the fact that it wasn't scrutinised, particularly coming after the government effectively losing a Supreme Court case when they tried to ram it through previously, is, I think, very regrettable. That's why today we will hear and shine a light on the issues in relation to the Arbitration Act and on the very, very serious issues in relation to the ratification of investor courts. Thank you.
First of all, thanks a lot to Lynn for this initiative. I think it's really important that, given that the Dáil, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael driving it, has refused to take its responsibility seriously to have pre-legislative scrutiny of what is an incredibly important piece of legislation. It's important that we're going to get a chance to hear from the experts and put that into the public domain. It is difficult to overstate how consequential this legislation is. I mean, when you explain it to people, it sounds kind of dystopian science fiction. This is literally setting up a parallel court process that is only accessible by corporations. It's a private court process, and these are arbitrators privately paid for their work on these courts. And these are not without power. They have very, very substantial power. So there are these sorts of mechanisms that other countries are involved in, and we have seen again and again and again what they're used for. You've seen multi-billion euro and dollar cases taken against countries because, for example, they increased their minimum wage, because they banned fracking, because they reduced rents. On any of those grounds, if this goes through, a corporation will be able to sue Ireland with the public set to pay any fee, for engaging in what's termed indirect expropriation. That they had an expectation that they'd be able to charge whatever rent that they want. Now rent controls have been imposed and effectively they're being done over, and therefore they go to this private court, and this private court's ruling is binding. And the government has attempted to dress this up, and on a European level, faced with massive opposition and massive opposition in Canada, to say no, this isn't what's happening here. It's not the investor state dispute settlement process. No, it's investor court system. But they're simply rebranding the same process, which is private court system, accessible only by major corporations. I mean, we were fighting this in the European Parliament over 10 years ago. When I was there in the International Trade Committee, we were working with really good groups across Europe, in Canada, warning about the very negative impacts for people's lives of this stuff. And exactly as has been said, there's two key things. One is that if you have a left-wing government in future that is actually going to legislate in the interests of people, this is a mechanism for corporations to try and undermine and prevent that happening. But the second one is, even without the court cases actually being taken by these corporations, it can have a regulatory chilling effect. So when we brought in a bill in the past to stop more fossil fuel investment in Ireland, to keep fossil fuels in the ground, one of the government's argument was to say, well, we could face legal costs in relation to this, therefore it needs a money message, therefore we're going to use an undemocratic mechanism to stop it getting through, even though it had a majority support in the Dáil. And what they were pointing to is, we're at that stage signed up to the Energy Charter Treaty. They want to sign up to CETA, and the possibility of these court cases being brought. So it has a massively undermining, undemocratic effect, and it's vital we bring it out to the public, and it's vital that we stop it.
I think a lot has been covered. Just the last point I just make is in terms of what a crazy decision it was not to scrutinise this. I'm a member of the Foreign Affairs and Trade Committee, as is Alice Mary, and we argued against it. The idea that you wouldn't scrutinise a piece of legislation that, in my view, undermines the standing of our own courts, that gives and this proposed piece of legislation, I think, takes powers away from our own courts. It creates a situation we don't really have legal clarity as yet. In what circumstances can Irish courts set aside the decisions of an international investor court? As things stand, if a company feels that they've been wronged in some way or other, they can of course take an action that is constitutionally their right. What this brings in is an international court that these decisions could potentially be superior to any decision arrived at by the High Court. The fact that a piece of legislation as weighty as that was not deemed worthy of scrutiny was an absolutely insane decision. We really regret it. And I think that had there been scrutiny in this institution, I think an awful lot of people would have sat up and took notice of the serious ramifications of it, the ramifications of it for our courts, but also the ramifications for workers, for the environment, for the ordinary people of Ireland. Why this event today is so important is to hear some of those voices, to hear some of the legal issues, and to hear some of the ramifications for the people of Ireland. Trade is a good thing, it's an important thing. We want to see trade with Canada, and we want to see trade with many other economies and countries around the world. That is already in provisional application. Trade has increased. We do not need these investor courts, and we don't need to see powers taken away from our own courts and their standing undermined to the benefit of investor courts of this kind.
We've seen the need over the past few months to diversify trade and take away our reliance on the US. Is that not reason enough to, I suppose, look at this new avenue and push forward from the government side? And then just separately,